It's Dr. Steve, master of the subconscious mind and doctor who fixes 100% of orthopedic issues not related to cancer, fracture, infection. And we're going to debate today the benefits of going vegan versus animal based. And again, much of this lies somewhere in the middle. So the problem is that most vegans don't even know how to eat right. They're doing it for ethical reasons, and so what's happening is they're deficient B12, which means they're going to be low. Well, B12 is essential for processing our methionine. So methionine is necessary to break down other proteins, but the other issue is that they're usually low in omega-3s and they're low in methionine. So those three factors, and so there's a higher prevalence of cerebrovascular events in most vegans and vegetarians for that reason. And so when we talk about longevity, that's there. Now the other issues is there's frailty involved. They have a higher prevalence of bone fractures. They generally are lower in calcium. There's a whole host of factors that are there with veganism and vegetarians that make them nutrient deficient. If they don't know what they're doing, they can supplement, and there's some things that they can do, but they're also low in protein. And animal proteins aren't sufficient; they don't have the proper amino acid profile. But when you talk to someone who is vegan or trying to debate on the vegan issue, and they're saying that plant-based is healthier, they talk about longevity, and their debate is usually about the iron, and it's also about mTOR, right? And those are those two factors. mTOR is cellular rebuilding, and they think that shortens lifespan. And in a way, they're right. They're absolutely right that an overabundance of mTOR can be that way, but there's ways around that. In that, if you intermittent fasting, that way we're getting proper balance of mTOR versus autophagy and clearing that metabolic waste product. So it's not, mTOR is not an issue. Now we look at data for all these, and you can find a way to justify your belief set however you choose. But the reality is that we're probably somewhere between. So when we talk about the iron issue, it's not a big deal as long as you are getting enough retinol from vitamin A, which the best source is cod liver oil and beef liver. That will help your copper bind to the iron to make the hemoglobin. So we don't have an iron issue there. They want to debate about the mTOR, like I covered earlier with the mTOR in protein. It's not such a big deal because we can balance it out with autophagy. Exercise increases autophagy. So you can have longevity there. Now, there's a reason for plants. And so the negative part of plants is they produce these exotoxins, and they're there evolutionary to help protect the plants so that animals don't eat them and they can continue to produce. It's just part of the cycle. So these things are like lectins and what's the other thing? Lectins are one component that's an anti-nutrient. It actually leaches nutrients we get from plants. And the other thing is oxalates, right? And oxalates disrupt sulfuration. And sulfuration, you need to make strong protein bonds to detox heavy metals, to help make neurotransmitters. And so, that's the problem. We got those oxalates and those other endotoxins or exotoxins that are going to be produced, and they're going to they are going to decrease the amount of minerals you can absorb and impede on other bodily functions. So that's why I say it goes somewhere in between. Now, here's another point that the vegans always want to make. The vegans are always saying that the lifespan of meat eaters is going to be shortened, and it's not healthy for you to eat that much meat, and they're going to die of cardiovascular disease. And what about the advanced glycation agents, the AGEs? And you'd have to overcook your meat dramatically. And so, when we're looking at the right balance, we're looking at having proteins and carbohydrates and plants. There's no reason not to have all of them and finding them in the right balance. But it's getting rid of all the processed stuff and the seed oils, right? The seed oils that are in a lot of the vegan foods and vegetarian foods that you're buying is actually what's creating the heart disease and the biggest issue, because that's what's creating the amyloid plaques, because it mixes with that iron and the oxalates to create those amyloids. So, vegans also like to say about, they die, that meat eaters die early of heart attacks. Well, if you're primarily a meat eater and you're completely carnivore, you eat no plants whatsoever, so this lion diet, you're going to increase your adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. When you do that, you actually cause a high amount of ammonia that constricts blood vessels. What's cool is that when you eat carbohydrates, it actually lowers cortisol. So, you lower those cortisol levels, and when you lower cortisol levels, then all of a sudden now you don't have that high amount of epinephrine and norepinephrine, high amount of adrenaline, so you don't have to worry about the heart disease. So you can see where there's a need for a balance of eating plants, of eating animal protein, and eating complex carbohydrates, oats, rice, and potatoes. So anybody who's telling you one side or the other is probably biased for whatever reason, and they're trying to push a product, or they just don't understand the literature or interpret it. They read one or two studies and they haven't looked at both sides. So always look at what's really going on with the whole picture. Like most things in life, it's never just black and white. There's usually some gray areas in there. So I'll tell you what I do for my diet is I consist of animal protein, but I don't do any chicken. It's venison, it's beef, and it's organ meat, right? Because we get a lot of our nutrients actually from organ meat. And then, and my dog eats the same food I do. I don't give him any processed foods as he processed. So, and then I have fruits. I don't do any nuts because I don't want the seed oils. I do complex carbohydrates in the form of rice and potatoes, and sometimes oats, but not very often. I use a lot of whey isolate post-workout, and the reason I use whey isolate is because it takes out a lot of the lactose. Most of us don't have the lactase to break it down. And then I do a lot of vegetables. So I'm getting all my micronutrients from the vegetables of broccoli, asparagus, spinach, right? I'm not afraid of the oxalates because I know that as long as I'm making sure that I'm getting enough glutathione, I'm not going to have an issue with that. And you need sulforaphane from the cruciferous vegetables. So there's a built-in complex there that's meant to help you. And then I add honey. So my post-workout meal is always a banana, honey, and cream of rice with my whey protein. So, you can throw other seasonings and herbs and spices, and those things are in there as well as beneficial. But, sometimes we got to make some accommodations by looking at someone's DNA. Maybe we got to supplement something or take some foods out temporarily, and eventually we can add those things back in once we get their methylation or enzyme pathways balanced out. But just be aware. Anybody who's pushing a carnivore diet is probably wrong. Anybody who's pushing a completely vegan diet is probably wrong when we're looking at health and longevity. If you have moral, ethical reasons why you're doing it, because the animal doesn't have a central nervous system and that's why you're doing it, or you don't like the way the animals are treated in the processing centers, fine, I understand that. But the reality is that everything has consciousness, and even rocks have consciousness because they're contained of proteins, neutrons, electrons, and our thoughts have a direct effect on that. So you can't use the argument that animals are living things, because every single thing here has consciousness and it actually is responsive. Even plants respond to music and how you talk to them and treat them. So just be wise. If you guys need help, reach out to me, protouchrehab.com.